Ja, hallo, liebe Motorsportfreunde. Heute die zweite Folge 1000 Grand Prix, die 100 besten Geschichten der Formel 1 und wir treffen heute eine der Ikonen der Formel 1. Ich glaube, wir müssen ihn nicht vorstellen. Jackie Stewart, nein, Sir Jackie Stewart. Die Zeit muss sein. Dreifacher Weltmeister, 27-facher Grand Prix-Sieger und einer der besten Rennfahrer aller Zeiten. First of all, hello, Jackie. Good to see you here and thank you for the invitation to come here to the Lake Geneva. Yeah, you have retired in 1973, but you're still part of this Formula One family. And I think the reason is that you are serving one of the longest contracts ever in this business. Is that true?
Yes, that's certainly part of it. I've been with Rolex for this, and now 19. I'll have been with them 51 years. And in July, it will be 50 years with Moet and Chandon. Mm-hmm. So they've been long, happy years, though. You know, I'm lucky. I lived my motor racing in an era where I really think it was at the height of colour, glamour, and excitement. You know, the swimming 60s. Mm-hmm. You know, with the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the whole scene, the short skirts and the mini skirts and the girls,
long hairs,
very long hair, and the girls so beautifully dressed, and Helen and Nina Rint and Sally Courage, all beautiful women, and they dressed for going motor racing. Mm-hmm. It was, and they were doing the timing and the lap charting for the team.
Yeah,
it was a wonderful era of camaraderie also with the drivers. Mm-hmm. My best friends were the people I raced with.
Yeah. I mean, I think we have to explain how you got into Formula One. I mean, nowadays it's all set. You have to do karting and then you have to find, let's say, a program of Mercedes, Red Bull or whoever, or you have a very, very rich father. In your days, there hadn't been such a program. How did you get into?
First of all, I'm a severe dyslexic. Mm-hmm. I can't read or I can't write or I don't know the national anthem and I don't know the Lord's Prayer. I can't remember these things. When you're dyslexic, there's a big disadvantage. So at school, I had a terrible time. Mm-hmm. I left school at the age of 15 with no education at all. I mean, zero. But fortunately, I started to shoot, trap shooting, clay pigeon shooting. Yep. My grandfather was a gamekeeper. My father was a good shot. And I started at the age of 14 shooting and I immediately won. Mm-hmm. And suddenly I was good at something. My whole life I hadn't been good at anything. Yeah. You know, when you're knocked down at school by your teachers and your colleagues. And suddenly shooting taught me a lot. Because, you know, when you look at a clay target, and I shot in Bern, for example, in the European Championships, I shot all over the world when I got up to the top level of shooting for Scotland, first of all, and then for Great Britain. And I learned mind management because if you miss the target, you never get it back. If you're a tennis player, you make one fault, you can always regain it. Same in golf, same in motor racing. Mm-hmm. In shooting, you miss it, you don't get it back. So when I started motor racing, just by chance, because I was a mechanic, a garage mechanic, and a very rich young man wasn't allowed to race because of his foundation. The family wealth was only on the one young man. Mm-hmm. But he had beautiful cars, and I was the mechanic of those beautiful cars. And as a reward, he said, why don't you do a small event, which I finished second. And he said, well, you should do one more, and I won it. And then it was like a rocket ship, because Écurie Écosse, the Scottish team, saw me racing in this gentleman's cars and said, would you like to drive for us? It never cost me a bean. Mm-hmm. You know, you think of the amounts of money that Lewis Hamilton's father had to find to keep him karting. And then, of course, he was picked up by McLaren. Mm-hmm. I was picked up by Écurie Écosse. And first year I got nothing. Second year, we'll give you a contract. £500 was the contract to drive a Togero and a Cooper Monaco. And it was through driving the Cooper Monaco that Ken Tyrrell saw me and gave me a test at Goodwood to see if I would drive or was good enough to drive for him in the new Formula 3, which was a Cooper with a BMC engine. And Bruce McLaren was down there because it was the works Cooper car.
Mm-hmm.
And he was setting the times, and I didn't know what I was doing. I just drove the car, and it turned out I was quicker than Bruce.
Mm-hmm.
And Ken Tyrrell signed me up. So it was a complete contrary to today's young drivers. I mean, I was the luckiest young man in the world to get in at a time where money had to be, I mean, there was no money buying yourself in my day. And, you know, from that point on, it was a rocket ship.
Mm-hmm.
And because it was only 1 year in Formula 3, and I won the European Championship and the British Championship, and BRM picked me up. Lotus gave me an opportunity, and also Cooper. They both, all three wanted me to drive for them, and I chose BRM because I wanted to be with Graham Hill rather than Jim Clark.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Because Jim Clark was by then a good friend, because both being Scottish and no other Scottish people at that time racing. We were very close, but I was very clear in my mind that there was only one driver in Lotus, and that was Jim Clark.
Okay.
Colin Chapman just thought he was God.
Mm.
So I thought, no good going there. The number 2 driver didn't finish many races, etc.
Yeah.
So going with Graham Hill, I thought, I'm going to learn more from Graham Hill because he's a very thorough, mechanical driver. And I think it was the right thing for me to do.
Was it a big step from Formula 3 into Formula 1, I mean, in terms of driving?
It was and it wasn't. First of all, keep in mind that the Formula 3 was a 1000cc formula.
And F1 1.5,
And the
those
Formula 1, of course, was a much more sophisticated engine. The BR engine was wonderful, and obviously, you know, the Ferraris were beautiful and sound and everything like that. The speed, of course, was different. The braking distance was different. The cornering speeds were higher. So, but I had been driving a Cooper Monaco and a Togero Buick and a Togero Ford, and I had been driving fast cars. So therefore, the adjustment wasn't as big as I thought it might have been.
Mm-hmm.
And BRM had a strong, robust car. I had a lot of finishes. I was in pole position in one of my first races at Goodwood, with Jim Clark beside me, and I got the pole position. So I think as a young driver, it was easier for me to get in and be competitive faster than somebody getting in today with a much more powerful engine than a Formula 2, for example, or a Formula 3 even. So therefore, I think my window of time, in a lot of different ways, was just a fantastic period within the history of motorsport.
Yeah, but then you won already in your first season in Monza. You won immediately in the second season in Monte Carlo. You must have thought, well, that's easy.
No, I never thought it was easy. I mean, I've never got carried away by any success. I think if you start thinking the wrong things, it really comes back and it doesn't pay.
Okay.
So I think I never thought I was the best. Even when I finished, I never thought I was categorically the best. And at that time, in my period of Formula 1, and I think maybe in the history of the sport, it was as good a period as has ever been. Mainly because of the Ford Cosworth engine. Because apart from Ferrari and BRM, really everybody had a Ford engine. And the great thing about the Cosworth was that nothing was different. That there was not 300 horsepower, 500 horsepower different than everybody else. If you had bought an engine for me to drive while I was with Ken Tyrrell, for example, it would have cost you £7,000 when it first came out, I would have driven with it. I was that confident that Cosworth were doing all the cars at the same output. And that meant that the racing was better, I think.
Yeah.
And at that time, I think also the calibre of drivers, there were so many of them. If you think of Jim Clark and Graham Hill and Jack Brabham and Denny Hulme and Jochen Rindt and Piers Courage and
John Surtees.
John Surtees and Emerson Fittipaldi and what a lineup. I don't think there's ever been a full field of that kind of talent since.
Yep.
With most of them driving the same engine. So that was a nice time. And I think it was a different time. It wasn't better. I mean, everybody said to me, oh, of course, your area was better. I said, hey, today is better.
Yeah.
You know, we've got the facilities, we've got the motorhomes, we've got the wonderful grandstands.
The safety.
We've got the safety thing, and that was probably the biggest element of my period of, irrespective of winning the World Championships, I think was changing the whole awareness to the dangers and to the limitations that the tracks allowed a driver. There was no room for mistakes at Spa or the Nürburgring, and many others, by the way. But these two were the high-speed ones, and even Monza.
Yeah.
So it's a whole different world now.
I think this approach to get a better awareness for safety, the thing what triggered it for you was your accident in Spa, '66.
Yeah, I had the only accident I've ever really had, a difficult accident where I was hurt at Spa. In those days, you were not allowed to do a warm-up lap at Spa because it was so long.
Yep.
And I think the organisers thought if they go slowly round and they look at either side, they'll be shocked by what was there. So you started off in a dry track and went up to the top of the hill, and as we were going down, there was a downpour. I've always said that Spa is swimsuit and raincoat weather. You know, just like that. And it could change 3 times in an hour. And the rain was torrential. 7 cars went off in the first corner at Bonneville. And I weaved my way through, no damage. And only John Surtees and Jochen Rindt were ahead of me. And I was back in the grid. I made a poor start. And I went through Masta, and there was a river of water, and I just aquaplaned. I knocked down a telegraph pole, I knocked down a woodcutter's hut, and then I ended up nearly the height of this room, down in a sort of basement area, open, and was trapped in the car. First lap, fuel tanks, and in those days we were using aviation fuel, very high octane. And it was very corrosive. And of course I was semi-conscious, unconscious, then coming semi-conscious. Graham Hill went off in the same river of water, so did Bob Bondurant, but there was nothing left to hit. I had knocked it all down. And they stopped. And both of them came to help me. And they didn't see me to begin with because I was down in this sort of outside basement. And they couldn't get me out of the car. Because in those days, the steering wheels were not removable. And there was no marshals, there was no medical help, nothing. And they borrowed spanners from a spectator's car to take the steering wheel off and then get me out of the car. And they didn't know how badly I was injured because I was unconscious, I was conscious. And they put me in the back of a hay truck. And I was burning.
The fuel.
Because of the high octane fuel, because the tanks had really emptied themselves into the monocoque that I was sitting in. So it was like a bath in there. And high octane, I was absolutely burning. So I said to Graham when I was half conscious, I said to Graham, you've got to get my clothes off because I'm burning. Graham took my clothes off. Now, I think he was quite experienced, maybe not of taking clothes off of men, but he got my clothes off very quickly.
Yeah.
And I was naked in the back of a hay truck. And it's a true story. But they went off to try and find ambulances or marshals, no communication, nothing. And 3 nuns arrived.
Really?
and looked at me, and they were from, I suppose they would have been 8 meters away, 10 meters away. I tell everybody, they looked, they were surprised, then they were impressed.
Yeah.
Until then, they had only seen Italian racing drivers.
Yeah.
So anyway, I was taken to a hospital. I was taken first of all to the medical centre. There were cigarette ends on the floor of the medical centre, and I was lying in a canvas stretcher. And I saw this stuff around, and I would go back into unconsciousness. Just a mess. Nobody to help. Put me in an ambulance with Jim Clark, because his car had broken down, so he came back to help Helen with me and Louis Stanley, the BRM man. And we followed the police escort to get to Liège Hospital. And the ambulance lost the police escort. And he couldn't find the hospital. No. I mean, all the things that today nobody could ever believe occurred. And then finally I was in a jet, which was very new in 1966. They thought I had a spinal injury, so they wanted to fly me into London, which they did. And Helen came with me on a plane with a doctor. But that's the only accident I ever had. But that was a wake-up call about how dangerous the sport really was. And I couldn't really do much about it then because I was a new puppy almost. Only my second year in Formula One. But later on, when I started to really take an interest, because I was then becoming world champion or second in the championship, I had enormous media support, if you like. And that's when the safety thing really got underway and how it came about.
I mean, the drivers in '69 boycotted Spa, and a year later they boycotted the Nürburgring, so you had to go to Hockenheim. How was that possible at all? I mean, if they wanted to do it today, they would have to go to FOM and then to the FIA. But in your days...
there still was the CSI.
Yep, CSI, what was the FIA?
There was the CSI, there was the circuit organisers, there was the car owners. It was still a bureaucracy.
Yeah, that's what I mean. How did you manage it to boycott a race?
I'll tell you what, managed in the Dorchester Hotel in London, the same day as the memorial service for Bruce McLaren. And most of the drivers turned up. And by which time we had had too many drivers killed. I mean, keep in mind, but by 1968, we lost a driver every weekend from
Jim Clark started,
and 7th of April was Jim Clark. Weekend of the 6th was Mike Spence in Indy. Then Ludovico Scarpiotti in June. In July, Joe Slesser at Rouen. And we were racing at the Nürburgring. On the 5th weekend. I won the race. It was in fog and rain. I won it by over 4 minutes. The first question I asked when Ken Tittle, when I came out of the car, is everybody all right? Because we expected at the Nürburgring, because a car would go off the road and you wouldn't see it, because the drop-off areas were so big. It was just amazing. There's a wonderful photograph of that great German photographer.
Yeah, Julius Weidmann.
And it's of me off the ground in the BRM, this much off the ground. And in the background is a wrecked touring car from the previous race.
They didn't even remove it.
Hadn't been removed. So that all had to change. So the meeting in the Dorchester Hotel after Bruce's memorial service, I said, you know, we can't continue like this with the racetracks doing nothing, because they wouldn't do anything. Jochen Rindt went to the Nürburgring and did a tour of the Nürburgring with the organisers to ask what we needed to do. I mean, 187 corners per lap. what is it? How many kilometres round the Nürburgring? It was a huge.
Yeah, 22.8 kilometers. I think was a lap. Yeah,
it was ridiculous.
Yep.
And they wouldn't do a thing. So I said, listen, if we race at the Nürburgring, nobody will ever do anything anywhere else.
Yeah.
Because it was so dangerous. And the drivers were worried they would lose their drive. Their owners would say, you've got to race or you're sacked. I said, look, unless we stand up. And the balance in the end was very difficult. I thought I was going to lose it. And if I had lost it, I would have resigned from the BRDC, from the JPDA.
Yeah.
And Jack Brabham stood up and said, we've got to go with Jackie. This is ridiculous. We're too many deaths. We've got to have it done. And we did that. And Spa would not do one thing. Not one thing.
Yep.
So we came out of Spa. No Spa. So really at that time there were giant decisions made. And because I was world champion as part of that time, I had more media coverage, I had more impact, even television had started, and certainly radio and so forth. So we got people behind us, and the big multinationals recognized the problem. And there were big multinationals in there, the tire companies, the Ford Motor Company, the big companies. And they realized, and in fact, had it not been done, I think the insurance companies would have stopped.
Okay.
So that was what I would call a very uncomfortable period, but a very productive period. And it didn't affect my driving at all. That was, everybody expected me to. Ken Tyrrell was worried that, you're thinking too much about this and you're too busy with that. It's going to take the edge off your racing. But I still was winning the World Championship and I was still winning Grand Prix. So again, it's to do with the mind. You can remove the things you don't want to think about and concentrate on the things that you have to concentrate on.
I mean, you said already you were good friends with Jim Clark, later on with Jochen Rindt. You lost both of them on the racetrack. How difficult was it to get yourself then motivated to go again in the car, knowing it's a dangerous business?
It's a strange... It's a strange anomaly because it's contradictory. All of these people we holidayed with, we stayed in their homes, they stayed with Helen and I. We knew them all, we knew the wives, we knew the girlfriends, we knew, Jim Clark's girlfriend was a close friend of Helen's, and Graham Hill and Jochen. Nina is still one of our best friends. Sally Stokes was Jimmy's girlfriend, but Sally Courage, again, Piers and Sally were great friends of ours. The racing drivers are a peculiar animal. When Jochen died in Monza, I was in the pits when Denny Holm told me that there had been a big accident in Parabolica. He says, it's Jochen, it looks bad. And I said, well, how bad? He said, I don't know, because he's in the car. People were around the cockpit of the car. I ran up to race control. They wouldn't talk to me. I said, listen, you've got to talk to me. Well, I think he's all right, but we don't know. He'll be taken to the medical centre. I'd go back and tell Nina that we've said that, but I'm going to the medical centre. I go to the medical centre and Jochen was there. And I did not think it was good news. Nina finally arrived. Now I knew that Jochen was dead. It was one of the worst things that had happened to me, up close.
Sure.
I was as close to you as I was with Jochen when that happened. And 45, 50 minutes later, they repaired the barrier and they said, practice is open. Ken says, you've got to get in the car. I was really upset. The only time I can remember it in a racing car, I had burst into tears with Helen and Nina and Jochen. I got into the car and it's a very strange thing. I went out in the car and suddenly the lights go out. Everything else disappears. It was in a March with a Ford engine. Not a competitive car that season. My first lap, I saw where the accident was. I continued. My first flying lap was the fastest lap I did all day.
Really?
And before or after. I put myself in second position on the grid with a march. Clay, I think, was on the pole.
Yep.
But when I came into the pits, I again burst into tears. And I'll never forget, somebody gave me a Coca-Cola bottle and I smashed it against the concrete of the, you know, the pit area.
Yep.
So it's peaks and valleys.
Yep.
But in the car, the lights go off and you're driving a racing car. It's not like playing golf, where if you hit the ball and then you have to walk for 200 meters to think about things. In a racing car, there wasn't time to think of something outside of driving. So it wasn't, everybody thought, oh, Jackie, that must have been a death wish.
Yep.
It was nothing to do with a death wish. It
Okay.
was adjusting the head into doing the job. And I mean, that happened quite a lot. I mean, when Piers died, Jochen and I, he was leading and I was second. And we drove through the flames of Jochen's car. And his helmet was on the ground, so we knew who it was.
Yeah.
When Joe Slesser had his big shunt at Rouen, caught fire, all the fuel goes on the track, so you have to again go through the flames, and you know whose car it is.
Yep.
So the racing driver of that era were a completely different mentality, I think, of any other era.
Okay.
Because there was so much death. And remember, we weren't just driving Formula 1 cars, we were driving Formula 2 cars, GTs,
You in Indy,
touring
Can-Am.
cars, Indy
Yep.
cars, Can-Am
Yep.
cars. I mean, somehow or other, the brain of a racing driver, and I think it might be kind of similar to a downhill skier.
Yeah.
There's something different about the relationship of danger, and you're in control of that danger almost. And if you make the mistake as a downhill skier,
Yep.
and it's a giant accident, there's only one man to blame. Generally speaking, unless it was a mechanical failure in a car, such as I'm sure Jimmy had, it's down to you. And I think that means it makes a different animal in the mentality of the business.
But why did you then maximize the risk by not only doing Formula 1, which was dangerous enough, but also going to Indy or Can-Am, which were powerful cars as well, very fast? Was it the money just? Really?
Money.
Really?
Well, it was money and prestige.
Yeah.
You know, more money at Indianapolis in those days than anything else. And keep in mind, Grand Prix drivers were not paid a lot. And the contract for a Formula 1 team might have been 20, 30, 40,000 pounds maximum. At 25,000 pounds would have been a good deal.
Yeah.
But if you drove, in addition to that, touring cars for Works Lotus, that means Works Ford team. If you drove for Maranello concessionaires in a Ferrari, there was a good contract went with it. You know, you got a contract and then you had 50% of the prize money and 50% of the bonuses. But if you did Can-Am and you did Indy as well, now I led Indy, I was 2 laps ahead with 5 laps to go.
Yeah, yeah.
And an oil pump shared. That, I would have earned that day more than $400,000.
Yeah,
Now
that was a number.
It's a good thing to do.
Yeah, sure.
And in any case, I think I had earned something like $30,000 for qualifying in the 3rd row. And I bought my first Rolex
Okay.
in Houston, Texas, with John Meekham, who was the owner.
Yep.
I said, the money you've given me, I'm going to buy a Rolex. Ironically, I wasn't with Rolex then.
Okay.
It's just that it was an ambition for me to have one. Good Swiss story. But somehow or other, it was just part and parcel of the program. Everybody did the Can-Am, you know, whether it was Dan Gurney or Jim Clark or Graham Hill or Jackie Stewart or Jochen Rindt or Francois Severo, Denny and Bruce, you know, we all did it.
Yep.
And in 1971, when I won the championship for the second time, that year I travelled across the Atlantic 86 times and raced. And I won the Monaco Grand Prix, and there's a bit of film in the Roman Polanski movie of me signing autographs, and I'm gaga. You can see it. I don't know where I'm going, but I'm just signing.
Yeah.
I had a duodenal ulcer that hemorrhaged. I had mononucleosis. I had all sorts of things go wrong because I was doing too much. But you're a racing driver, you're fit, you're strong,
Yeah.
and somebody's offering you good drives, you know, proper drives, with good money. And it's not just the money, it's winning a Can-Am race, or it's trying to win Indianapolis, or it's still trying to win the World Championship. And in the same in sports cars, because you're joining, the Formula One driver is joining people like Jack Sears in a Cortina, or Sir John Whitmore in a Cortina, who were really fast. So Jimmy and I were driving for Team Lotus or other teams in Lotus Cortinas, in Lotus Elans, in you know, P1s, P2s, P4 Ferraris, fantastic cars.
Yeah.
And the IndyCar and the Indy thing with the guys coming from Europe into the establishment of the good old boys, that was a whole cultural change.
I understand, yeah, yeah.
Staying in the Holiday Inn in Indianapolis one weekend and the Hotel de Paris in Monte Carlo the next weekend. I mean...
Yeah, I think we obviously have to talk about your success as well. You once told me that in 1968 you could have been champion already. I think you had to leave 2 races because of a wrist injury. But you told me once it would have been too early, that championship. How can a championship come too early?
I think it's to do with the era. When we were world champions, Ken Tittle and I, for example, or Matra and I, Ford Motor Company or the Goodyear Tire Rubber Company had me travelling around the whole world. I mean, starting in London and going to India and going to Sri Lanka and going to Indonesia and going to Thailand and going to China and going to Taiwan and going to Brazil and Argentina and Panama and Colombia.
Yeah.
Because we're world champion. And Goodyear and Ford were global companies, and they had to maximize the opportunity. And they had budgets for that, because we were doing huge media. We were doing work with the police departments for safety and everywhere we went, because the big multinationals wanted to have good relationships with government, and we were meeting prime ministers and heads of state and monarchs in some cases, because we would do Spain, we would do Portugal, we would do every country in Europe. By the time you finished, it was the beginning of the next season. There was no downtime at all. But you were being promoted, and therefore people like myself had a lot of contracts commercially, and I learned the commercial world by meeting the most powerful people in the world. Because if you meet with the president in Argentina when we were there, when I went back to race, I was always invited to dinner in the president's mansion.
Yep.
So all of these things have an influence.
But that would have been too early for you in 1968, all this...
In my opinion, I don't think I was round enough, experienced enough to be what Graham Hill was doing. I thought he was the right man for a world championship. And I didn't... I lost it, the championship, in Mexico, in the Grand Prix. I had a fuel tank pump that failed, and I was losing fuel. I mean, I was losing energy. The car wouldn't pick up any fuel on left-hand corners. So I lost the championship, but it really wasn't, you know, I had had a good year. I had won a lot of races, you know, and not just in Formula One, but in the other
Yep.
categories like Formula 2, etc. So I really honestly didn't think I was ready to be world champion.
Okay. Then next year you became champion the first time. You have done it 3 times. Which one was the most satisfying from a sporting point of view?
I think the first one, because the Matra was a wonderful car to drive, but we were all on a Ford engine, so therefore there was equality. There wasn't a huge difference in power and so forth. And in addition to which, we spoke about what the major multinationals did. Ford Motor Company, for example, immediately had me fly down to Mexico. And we were doing a whole tour of Latin America to Panama and all sorts of small countries. But it got me into Mexico, the Copacabana Hotel on that wonderful beach of Ipanema. And they said, there's a dinner and we'd like you to present the trophy to the winner of the Brazilian Formula, what was it called in those days? Formula Junior Championship. And I said, yeah, I'm happy to do that. But it's at 8 o'clock the dinner starts. Walter Hayes told me, the head of PR for Ford Motor Company. I was ready with Helen at 8 o'clock. The winner arrived at 10 o'clock. His name? Emerson Fittipaldi. He was being Brazilian. You know, the invitation said 8 o'clock, Brazilian time, that's 10 o'clock.
10 o'clock.
And here's Jackie, world champion, sitting waiting for the Formula
Junior
champion.
In your last year, you knew already at the beginning that it would be your last year, 1973.
I made the decision in April.
Was there a special moment?
No.
No.
It suddenly came to me that for Helen was one of the things. For the boys, for Paul and Mark, so many people were being killed, and the rumours were terrible. Joe Bonnier had died, and they were going to the same school as Paul and Mark. And one of the times they had said to Paul and Mark, little boys, you know, 7, 8 years of age, oh, by the way, when's your father going to be killed? And they said, well, why is he not going to be? He said, no, because he's a Formula One driver. And my daddy was killed, and all the Formula One drivers get killed. So he comes home, Paul comes home, and asks Helen and I when I'm going to be killed. Now, that wasn't why I retired, but it was a different era. And somehow or other, when the time came for me, I had just signed a new contract with Ford and with Goodyear for 5 years, with ABC Television in America, which was a big deal. And I thought, it's better to stay healthy, and it's better to stop at the top. So I was very anxious to win the World Championships, which we did.
And was it difficult to keep it secret?
No, nobody knew. Ken Tyrrell told nobody. Walter Hayes told nobody. I told 3 people. Helen didn't know. Nobody knew, and nobody leaked it. And everybody thought when Francois was killed at Watkins Glen, that was the reason for my retirement, because I didn't announce it until 2 weeks later. Ford Motor Company did a big function in London in the Carlton Tower Hotel, and it was there that I announced that I am no longer a racing driver. And there was much speculation of whether Jackie would become, because he was world champion, because he's going to go on. Or, oh no, Francois Sever has been killed. And that was a big loss to us. But that had no influence on me retiring, because I had made that decision in April and told those 3 people, 2 Ford people plus Ken. And it was the right thing to do. And I felt completely relaxed. I never had an itch to go back. It was one of these perfect sort of decisions that happened that you don't get credit for it. It just came that way.
Did you ever feel sad that you never had a last race? Because your last race, you obviously didn't start on.
I mean, I could have started the last race. I mean, Ken and the team were up for it. And then we started to talk more about it. And I said, you know, really, and respect to Francois, I think it would be wrong. We've got the championship, constructors, drivers championships. Why would we race it? You know, here's our teammates being killed horrendously, by the way. You know, with every driver having to stop and go to Francois and be shocked. I mean, everybody was affected by it that was on the track. And I had made my decision. And when you make good decisions, you don't change them.
Yeah. Have you ever regretted it?
Never.
Was there ever a temptation?
Never.
Maybe a good offer to come back?
Good offers I had.
Yes. Yeah.
I was at one point I was offered £6 million to come in, and £6 million was a huge amount. It still is, but it was a huge amount of money in those days to go back, and it never interested me. It just wasn't on my radar at all. I was happy. I was doing engagements all around the world. I was making more money all the time. Forget the money. The money wasn't the issue.
Yeah.
But I was still going to races. I was still doing commentary for ABC's Wide World of Sports. I was still working for Ford and with Goodyear. So I was still in the same environment, still happy with the same people, the same friends. And I never missed it at all.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jackie Stewart. It was a wonderful inside view of your time in motorsport. And I think also for the young people, it's an interesting, very interesting story of a complete different era. Ja, liebe Motorsportfreunde, wir verabschieden uns heute. Wir hatten mit Jackie Stewart, glaube ich, einen der besten Rennfahrer aller Zeiten. Und wir sehen uns dann beim nächsten Mal. Ciao.